Flight attendant kicks black woman off plane. 5 minutes later, she owns the plane. Before we dive into today's jaw-dropping tale, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. This is a story of power, prejudice, and ultimate karma, so buckle up because things are about to get turbulent. The plane was alive with the sounds of travel, seatbelts clicking, flight attendants making their final checks, and the occasional rustle of overhead bins snapping shut. The familiar scent of stale coffee and recycled air clung to the cabin, mingling with the quiet chatter of passengers settling in for their flight. Seated in 3A was Naomi Carter, a striking black woman in an immaculate ivory pantsuit. Her presence was effortless, her confidence unmistakable. With a calm demeanor, she adjusted the delicate bracelet on her wrist and settled in, exhaling as she prepared for a smooth, uneventful journey. But the universe and a certain flight attendant had other plans. Enter Rebecca. Rebecca moved with the clipped precision of someone who wielded her authority like a weapon. With her neatly pinned blonde bun and a name tag that gleamed under the cabin lights, she exuded control. But the way her sharp, assessing gaze landed on Naomi, that was something else entirely. She hovered just long enough to make her presence known, then leaned in. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step off the plane." The words sliced through the low hum of the cabin like a blade. Conversation stilled. A businessman scrolling on his phone glanced up. A teenage boy, barely paying attention, instinctively hit record on his phone. Naomi's fingers curled around the armrest, but she remained composed. She met Rebecca's gaze with a look that was equal parts curiosity and challenge. "Excuse me?" Naomi's voice was measured, soft yet laced with something dangerous. Rebecca's stance was rigid, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You're being non-compliant with crew instructions." Passengers exchanged confused glances. Someone 2 rows behind murmured, "Wait, what?" She just sat down. A mother, bouncing her toddler on her lap, frowned deeply. Naomi, however, didn't flinch. If Rebecca expected an argument, she wasn't going to get one. Instead, Naomi tilted her head ever so slightly, and then she smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, the kind that said, "You have no idea who you're messing with." What happened next? Let's just say this flight wasn't going to take off quite the way Rebecca expected. The tension in the cabin thickened, a silent pressure building as Naomi's measured gaze locked onto Rebecca's. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably, their curiosity and unease rippling through the rows like a slow-moving wave. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," Naomi said, her voice calm but firm. "What instructions have I failed to comply with?" Rebecca's lips pressed into a thin line. "Ma'am, I don't have to explain myself further. If you refuse to leave voluntarily, security will escort you off." A murmur spread through the cabin. Someone in first class peeked around their seat. A young woman by the window pulled out her phone, and a businessman in the aisle seat shook his head. Naomi took a slow breath, her fingers now resting lightly on her lap, her nails tapping against the smooth fabric of her trousers. "I purchased this seat. I have not raised my voice, nor have I disrupted this flight in any way. So again I ask, why am I being removed?" Rebecca shifted on her feet, her authority momentarily shaken. She glanced toward the front of the plane where another flight attendant, an older woman named Carol, observed with wary eyes. Carol had been in this industry long enough to recognize when a situation was spiraling. Passengers began to take sides. "This is ridiculous," a deep voice rumbled from the back. A tall, middle-aged man in a navy suit shook his head. "She's literally just sitting there." Another passenger, a woman with a toddler in her lap, spoke softly. "This doesn't feel right. She hasn't done anything." But a man in a baseball cap near the emergency exit muttered, "People always want to make a scene. Just get off so we can leave." Naomi remained seated, her posture dignified. "If there's a valid reason, I will leave, but you've yet to give me one." Rebecca inhaled sharply, exasperation flashing across her face. She turned toward the front, motioning for the captain. "Fine," she said, her tone clipped. "We'll let the captain handle this." The murmurs grew louder as Naomi sat back, her expression unreadable. She knew something no one else on that plane did. The cabin's air turned heavy, thick with unease. The hum of conversation dipped into hushed whispers, the flickering cabin lights casting an almost theatrical glow on the unfolding drama. It was no longer just about Naomi and Rebecca. This moment had become something bigger. Passengers, trapped in their narrow seats, now found themselves either spectators or silent jurors. Across the aisle, an elderly white woman in a lavender cardigan clutched her purse a little tighter, her wrinkled hands betraying the uncertainty in her eyes. Behind Naomi, a young black couple exchanged knowing glances, the woman resting a hand on her partner's knee as if reminding him to stay calm. A teenage boy, earbuds in but volume lowered, subtly angled his phone, recording. A few rows ahead, a heavy-set man with a receding hairline sighed dramatically. "For God's sake," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "Why does this always have to happen?" But the real shift happened when a flight attendant named Carol, seasoned, observant, and less eager to make enemies, leaned toward Rebecca, whispering urgently, "Are you sure about this? She doesn't seem to be causing any trouble." Rebecca's jaw tightened. Her authority was being questioned now, not just by Naomi, but by her own colleague. "She's being difficult," Rebecca snapped under her breath, though her voice held an uncertain edge. "She was giving me attitude from the start." Carol's gaze flickered toward Naomi, whose expression remained composed, almost bemused, like a queen watching a court jester perform. Rebecca turned away sharply, waving over a male flight attendant, Justin, who had been watching from the galley with wary eyes. "Get the captain," she ordered, her voice carrying enough edge to warn him not to argue. Justin hesitated. "Maybe we should." "Now, Justin." Justin sighed but obeyed, disappearing behind the cockpit door. Naomi took the moment to glance around the cabin, scanning the faces of those watching. Some avoided her eyes, shifting awkwardly in their seats. Others looked back at her with silent support. And then there were the skeptics. A woman in business attire, laptop open, scoffed and muttered, "Some people love the drama." A man in a hoodie, arms crossed, smirked. "Bet she's about to pull the race card." The tension in the cabin was now palpable, a thick, invisible weight pressing down on everyone. The murmurs had grown louder, pockets of passengers now openly discussing what was happening. Naomi, however, remained composed. She had sent her message. Now she waited. Rebecca, still standing over her, arms crossed, glanced toward the cockpit impatiently. Justin had gone to fetch the captain, and with every passing second, the authority she had clung to so tightly was beginning to slip. Carol, the older flight attendant, cleared her throat. "Maybe we should just de-escalate." Rebecca cut her off. "We've given her an order." Naomi turned slightly, her gaze locking onto Carol's. "De-escalate? You say that as if I caused this situation." Her voice was quiet, but it carried a power that silenced the immediate area. The passengers were no longer just onlookers, they were invested. Near the window, a young black woman with braids whispered, "I swear, this is exactly why I hate flying sometimes." A businessman in first class had taken his AirPods out and was now leaning forward, intrigued. The teenage boy who had been recording? His fingers tightened around his phone. He had seen enough viral videos to know this was heading in that direction. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Whitmore, a tall, balding man with a graying beard, stepped out, adjusting his cuffs as he scanned the cabin. His eyes landed on Naomi, then flicked to Rebecca. "What's going on?" His tone was even, but there was a layer of irritation beneath it. Rebecca, standing taller now that her superior was present, gestured at Naomi. "She's refusing to comply with crew instructions. I told her she needed to deplane, and she's—" "I asked for a reason," Naomi interrupted, her voice still calm. "She hasn't given me one." The captain studied her for a beat, then turned back to Rebecca. "And why exactly does she need to deplane?" Rebecca faltered. She had expected immediate backup, not an interrogation. She was being disruptive when I asked her to adjust her bag." A few passengers scoffed audibly. "That's it," someone muttered. The businessman from first class finally spoke. "Captain, I've been sitting here the whole time. This woman hasn't raised her voice once. If anything, your flight attendant is the one escalating the situation." Whitmore exhaled sharply. He knew when a situation was about to turn into a PR nightmare. "Rebecca, if there's no safety concern, we're not removing a passenger over a personal dispute." Rebecca's face flushed. She opened her mouth, then closed it. And then, ding. Naomi's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. A simple reply to the message she had sent earlier, handled. She smiled. At that moment, the airline's corporate emergency line lit up. a direct call from the CEO's office. Rebecca and Captain Whitmore had no idea what was coming next. The hush that had settled over the cabin was now almost eerie. Passengers watched, breaths held, eyes flicking between Naomi, Rebecca, and Captain Whitmore, as if sensing that something monumental was about to happen. Then the captain's intercom crackled. The call from corporate had come through. Whitmore frowned, reaching for his radio. "This is Captain Whitmore." A brief silence, then a voice came through, sharp, authoritative, and unmistakably high-ranking. "Captain, stand down immediately. Passenger Naomi Carter is to remain on this flight." Rebecca stiffened. Her face went pale. Whitmore's brows furrowed. Sir, we had a—" "I don't care what you think you had," the voice interrupted. "You are speaking about Naomi Carter, the majority shareholder of this airline's parent company." A collective gasp swept through the cabin. Rebecca's mouth fell open, but no words came. The passengers, who had been mere spectators in the unfolding drama, now turned their gazes back to Naomi, eyes widening in realization. The businessman in first class let out a low chuckle. "Well, damn," the young woman with braids whispered. "No freaking way." The teenage boy, still recording, muttered, "Oh, this is going viral." Naomi, meanwhile, remained poised, her expression unreadable as she slipped her phone back into her pocket. Captain Whitmore cleared his throat, adjusting his stance. "Miss Carter, I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. You, of course, are welcome to stay on this flight." Naomi tilted her head slightly, then turned her attention to Rebecca, who now looked as if she wished the floor would swallow her whole. "Rebecca," Naomi said, her voice steady but firm, "I assume you don't recognize me." Rebecca's lips parted, but she seemed unable to form a coherent response. Naomi continued, her tone never rising, but carrying undeniable authority. "I make it a point not to interfere in day-to-day operations, but when my investment, my airline, is being represented by someone who abuses their power, that becomes my business." Rebecca swallowed hard. "You assumed I was just another passenger," Naomi went on, her voice soft but lethal. "You saw my face, my skin, and you made a decision. A wrong one." Silence. Carol, the older flight attendant, looked down, her expression a mixture of sympathy and quiet disapproval. Justin, who had fetched the captain, shifted uncomfortably. Naomi finally stood, adjusting her blazer with graceful precision. "I will be speaking with corporate about you," she said to Rebecca. "And if I find this is a pattern, you will not be wearing that uniform much longer." A nervous squeak left Rebecca's lips. Then Naomi turned back to Captain Whitmore. "Now, if we're done here, I'd like to take my seat. I believe we have a flight to catch." The captain nodded quickly, stepping aside. Passengers who had been holding their breath exhaled, some smirking, some whispering in disbelief. The businessman in first class actually clapped twice before stopping himself. As Naomi sat back down, the teenage boy leaned toward her. "That was legendary." Naomi smiled slightly, fastening her seatbelt. 5 minutes ago, Rebecca had tried to kick her off this plane. Now, Naomi owned it. The businessman in first class let out a low chuckle. "Well, I didn't see that coming." Rebecca looked as if the floor had been ripped out from under her. Her carefully curated authority crumbled, replaced by a dawning horror that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Captain Whitmore exhaled sharply, adjusting his collar as he turned toward Naomi. "Miss Carter, on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. You are, of course, welcome to remain on this flight." Naomi smiled, but it wasn't just a smile. It was a statement, the kind of expression worn by someone who had long mastered the art of patience and power. She didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. Instead, she simply nodded. "I appreciate that, Captain," she said smoothly, gathering her composure as if none of this had rattled her in the slightest. "Though I do believe we need to discuss your crew's training policies upon landing." Rebecca's eyes darted around in panic, but there was nowhere left to hide. The murmurs in the cabin were no longer confused. They were amused, empowered, inspired. A passenger in the back whistled low. "Damn, that's karma at 30,000 feet. The young man with the phone recording? Oh, you better believe this was already going viral." As the flight resumed its pre-takeoff preparations, passengers sat back with a newfound appreciation for the woman in 3A. Naomi Carter had walked onto that plane as just another passenger. 5 minutes later, she had reminded everyone, never judge a book by its cover. And Rebecca? Well, let's just say that by the time this flight landed, she might be looking for a new job. Wow, what a ride, right? This is what happens when power meets poise, when confidence trumps prejudice, and when karma serves up justice in the most unexpected ways. If you love this story, smash that like button and drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed a situation like this firsthand? We want to hear all about it. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Until next time, keep your head high and your power undeniable. See you in the next video.